Lighting has nearly infinite variations, but the actual parameters are relatively few. The direction of the light relative to the subject, the altitude of the light relative to the subject, how hard or soft the light is, and the color. Notice how both direction and altitude of the light not only light the subject differently, they give it a completely different emotional tone. Altitude especially alters the mood radically. There are exceptions, of course, but in general we try to avoid flat front lighting. It gives no depth, no shape to the subject, and it doesn't separate from the background. As the light comes around to the side, the subject gets shape, definition, depth. The scene becomes more three-dimensional. Here, a backlight and a kicker are added for further separation from the background. As the light comes back around to the front, again, it gets flat, no depth, no separation. Lighting from the upstage side, or the side away from camera, is a fundamental way of adding depth and shape to the subject. Here we're auditioning various levels of fill. Too much fill destroys what we've built. Lighting from the downstage is seldom complementary to the subject. Film and video are basically two-dimensional mediums. Lighting is one of the main tools we use to give a scene depth, dimensionality, a foreground, a midground, and a background. We call it three-point lighting, but usually there are more lights involved. Here's a soft key, a backlight, a kicker, and now we audition various levels of fill. This is an experiment with various levels of diffusion. Here we start with a bare mighty mole on the subject. We'd actually rarely use a mighty mole directly on someone. It is normally used through diffusion or as a bounce. Opal softens the shadows slightly, but not much. We use it sometimes to take the curse off, smooth out the lighting pattern a little bit. Light grid cloth is a light diffusion. Notice how the shadows are getting a little softer, a little less distinct. Grid cloth is a heavy diffusion. See how soft and indistinct the shadows are becoming? This is because the grid cloth helps the light wrap around her face. It softens the shadows. With all these types of diffusion, they are mounted on a 4x4 frame, the same distance from the subject and the same source. 216 is also a heavy diffusion, not as heavy as grid cloth. Muslin has been used since the early days of filmmaking. It's a heavy cloth diffusion. Notice its creamy, soft quality. The shadows are soft and gentle as the light wraps around her face. Again, this is a 4x4. If we really wanted a softer light, we'd go to a larger diffuser, a 6 by 6, an 8 by 8, a 12 by 12, or perhaps even a 20 by 20. Silk is a medium heavy diffusion, not nearly as heavy as muslin or even grid cloth. Here we're stacking two frames, an opal behind and a muslin closest to the model. Stacking frames is often a way to get a really soft light. Stacking two frames with heavy diffusion is about as soft as we're going to get with only a 4x4 frame. To get softer, we would need to go to larger and larger diffusion. Here we are back again to the bare mighty mole. Licos are primarily theatrical lights, but they're very popular in film work as well. They give a clean, distinct shadow. Very hard light, but often used as a beauty light as well. Here's an experiment with a source 4 Lico and some light lace. We're not trying to put a pattern on the subject, just add a bit of texture to the light. Here it is without the lace and with the lace. Carrying a lamp is a very basic technique and illustrates some fundamental techniques of lighting. Often we want a character to be lit by a lamp, but the lamp just doesn't produce enough light to actually light them for the scene. In that case, we add a light which appears to be coming from the lamp, but isn't really. In this case, we're using a 2K zip light from the same direction and approximate altitude. We're also adding a bit of a kicker, a backlight, an eye light, and just a touch of fill. Eye lights are essential, especially if the face is lit very low key. Here without it, the right side of the face is lost. With too much eye light, it becomes a fill. What we're looking for is just a slight catch light in the right eye.